Her name was Stacy. She came there as a guest and left as a witness. She has no beautiful words for the Syrian prison, only numbers, who made it till morning and who didn't. Torture there wasn't a rumor or a legend. It was routine. The walls rang with screams, and the guards kept saying that death was a mercy you had to earn. In this episode, how Stacy ended up in the hands of security services, what she saw in Aleppo, and why she still flinches when a door slams. We'll take apart the system where confessions are forced out, and what happens to a person when every day is divided between interrogation and waiting for one. This isn't a story about heroism. It's about survival, about counting your breaths and finding meaning in them, and about those who stayed behind, where the word truth sounds like a sentence. Stacy moved to Syria before the big war, first as a student, then as someone who had friends there, favorite routes, and the same tea stalls she visited every morning. The country lived on the edge, but life still went on. Classes, short trips, long talks, and kitchen light. When the fighting began, she didn't leave right away. She came back on short visits, helped friends, checked on those still in Aleppo and nearby towns. Every trip was a mix of fear and bureaucracy. Any hotel wasn't just a reception desk, it was also a list of guests for the political security office. Stacy wasn't one to hide her opinions. She talked, argued, shared books and faith. In peacetime, that sounded like friendship. In war, it became a reason for questions. On March 8, 2013, she and a friend checked into an ordinary Aleppo hotel. The night was restless. Checkpoints, distant explosions, a corridor where every sound felt like footsteps. In the morning, men in plain clothes arrived. Just a few questions, routine, they said. Routine stretched into hours. The political security office, that's a place where even the walls listen. They asked why she came, who she met, what she read, and who she gave books to. Her passport lay on the officer's desk like a switch that could turn off hope. After the questions, they sent her back to the hotel, but not free. Then came the shuffle between offices, calls that no one answered, and short orders with no explanations. That's when you learn a new kind of time, one that flows not by the clock, but by someone else's decisions. By then, Syria had already lived in fire for years. In Aleppo, neighborhoods changed hands, prisons filled faster than cells emptied. The word security became an excuse for anything. Any act of civic life looked suspicious. In that reality, Stacy simply happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Not a spy, not an activist, not a hero. Just a person who kept visiting when most had stopped. And that was enough to fall into a system not everyone escapes. Then came the interrogations, windowless rooms, doors clicking like switches, and the word confession, which meant only one thing: it would be forced out of you. That's how an ordinary trip turned into a story of survival. She hadn't come as a journalist or an activist, just as someone with friends and memories in that city. Aleppo met her with dusty air and a cautious silence where every sound tested its limits. The taxi rocked softly near the hotel entrance, and Stacy caught herself in an odd habit, counting the suitcases in the lobby, as if that could tell her who had left for good and who still hoped to return. At night, she barely slept. Doors slammed in the hallway. Distant blasts rolled across the city. Each pause between them felt longer than it should. She was used to that sound. It was like a breath someone held too long. By dawn, the city relaxed its shoulders. She went up to the roof and looked at the domes, antennas, and thin smoke trails from kitchens already boiling tea. Life had a way of pretending it was stronger than fear. Downstairs, the tea was sweet and sticky. The cup warmed her hands. At the desk, the clerk marked the date, March 8, 2013. In a normal world, it would be a day of flowers and cards. Here, it was just another day that ran its course, until it didn't. She wrote a few tasks in her notebook. Call Iman, pick up the camera, buy a new SIM card. Life loves lists. They create the illusion of control. A knock at the door. Polite, like in a decent house. 3 men in plain clothes. No shouting, no show of power. Just The quiet confidence of people who don't need to explain who they are. Just a few questions. You understand? Of course she did. In Syria, a few questions hasn't meant a few for a long time. She grabbed her passport, her jacket, left her phone on the nightstand. The word routine floated through her head. She didn't yet know that routine was the most terrifying thing of all. A car without markings was waiting in the hotel lobby. The windows weren't tinted enough to alarm anyone, but cloudy enough to blur faces on the sidewalk. Inside, it smelled like tobacco and hot metal. The driver stared straight ahead. The city slid by like a stage play where no one had told you your lines, but they still expected you to speak. The first office looked ordinary. A desk, a chair, folders, a fan in the corner that worked only for show. The man across from her held her passport like a key to a cage, casual in his hand, but always in sight. The questions started simple. Why she came, where she stayed, who she met. Stacy answered briefly, without decoration. She had learned that extra adjectives don't live long in places like this. Then the questions got longer. Who was Iman? How long they'd known each other? Which books she had passed along, and to whom? For what purpose? Which neighborhoods she visited, and why those? The talk moved slowly, like a test of endurance where the point wasn't information but a slip. In every pause, she could hear her pulse. It's strange how fast your own body becomes the only reference you trust. They moved her from room to room, chair to chair. Only the tones changed. Some spoke almost friendly, some flat and even, like radio announcers. Sometimes they kept silent for a long time, and the silence itself was a question. In places like this, silence does its own investigation. Her passport lay on the table the whole time. Still, like an object taken from you and set out, so you won't forget it's no longer yours. By noon, she caught herself stopping to notice faces. She remembered only details: a pinky ring, a scratch on a plastic folder, a cup mark on an old map. These details created a feeling of normal life, as if everything could be described and filed. And if it could be filed, maybe it could be changed. She knew that was self-deception, but she held it like a handrail on a shaking bus. They sent her back to the hotel while we clarify things. The phrase sounded almost gentle. Keys still stood on hooks at the desk. Someone argued over room prices. The world pretended to be fine. In the evening, they returned, polite again, this time without prelude. Pack your things. She took the minimum: documents, a toothbrush, a warm sweater. Her head felt empty and loud at once. When they take you the second time, you already know what a few questions means. The second trip was shorter. No extra words, no extra glances. There was no sign on the gate, but everyone knew where they were. Inside, it smelled of bleach and fatigue. They sat Stacy down again, and everything started over. Only now the questions had less curiosity and more algorithm. They asked for her roots, who she spoke with at the market, what numbers were in her contacts, who knew she was here, who would vouch for her, what sense it made to carry books in times like these. Every line ended with an invisible period that meant not disagreement, but the fact that you had understood the rules. She nodded. Nodding was safer than arguing. When they asked for her email password, she felt the blade of the situation for the first time. Until then, it seemed temporary, a misunderstanding that would dissolve under a smart signature. The password was one you invent in calm years and carry like a charm. She dictated it slowly, as if announcing a sentence on her own letters and calls. The man wrote it down without emotion. He didn't care what your charm was called. By about 9 in the evening, she was tired of answering. Her head felt light, like after a long swim. They sent her back to the hotel again. We'll continue tomorrow. At the door, the plainclothes man's eyes paused on her hands. Don't worry, he said, like soothing a child afraid of the dentist. If everything's clean, everything will be fine. That line belongs to the universal dictionary of no one's responsibility. She nodded. Nodding was still safer. She didn't sleep that night. Someone walked the corridor. A metal shutter banged somewhere. A generator coughed far away. Stacy listened to the city the way you listen to a sick person, counting breaths, not sure what normal means. Morning came fast with no promises. At 9, polite knocking again, 3 times. That's how long days start, days that first pretend to be short. They led her the same route: hotel, street, car, yard, office. The passport landed on the desk again like a store receipt, proving you once could buy things. And the questions again, now edged with irritation. Why keep coming if you know it's dangerous? What are you looking for? Who gets the books? Where does the money for trips come from? None of it sounded like tell the truth. It sounded like confirm what we already decided. That's when Stacy understood. The process no longer belonged to logic. It belonged to the system. In this system, you can be guilty for not leaving and suspicious for arriving. Every door opens only to slam. In the evening, they offered her a paper agreeing to an additional conversation. She signed it. Not because she agreed, but because in some places a signature isn't consent. It's a way to stay inside the predictable. That ended day 1, which could be titled Arrival and Detention, though really it was an entry into another calendar. In it, there are no holidays or weekends. There is only today and for now, and one word that still whispered but already hung in the air like the smell of a storm: interrogation. They began to shuttle her in circles like a file on a conveyor belt. Not a bus, but something between a rolling solitary cell and a capsule for moving through the halls of power. A door opens. You sit, you ride, you get out, you sit again. On every new level appear new people with the right to ask the same questions in a different tone. The security machine runs on repetition. You tire before the system does. First came registration, where everything starts with your name translated into a different alphabet. A long table, plastic chairs, fluorescent lamps that turn faces into gray masks. A man in uniform typed her name wrong, then didn't fix it. Because in that room, it mattered more that a record existed than that it was correct. The scanner hummed. The passport disappeared into a drawer where, for now, means until told otherwise. Next was the room where contacts are checked. On the desk lay printouts of her messages, pages without context. Any stray line looked like a confession because there was no before or after. "Why did you write this?" she explained, but explanations had nothing to cling to. Here words slide on glass and leave no trace. The man turned pages, marking dates with a highlighter. His face showed no anger, only habit, like a cashier selling the 100th loaf of the day. Then a corridor and a room for coordination between agencies. A city map on the wall with colored pins. Each pin means interest. Each interest means a pretext. They explained that if someone saw her with a bag somewhere, that's a reason to match routes. If she has 2 phone numbers, the pretext doubles. The logic is simple. The less privacy you have, the clearer the system, and the calmer the people who run it. Waiting is the main procedure. The narrow corridors smell of dust and antiseptic. Clocks stop being tools. You orient by other people's routines. If a door bangs open and someone says, "Next," then the east side of the building is breathing faster. If a group in identical jackets goes up the stairs, the next stage is starting, the one where they talk louder than they listen. Waiting is managed like temperature. They turn it up until you start confusing your own thoughts. In another room, a man without insignia appeared. He didn't introduce himself, but asked questions like he was entering a password. "Who will vouch for you?" She named people, and the names sank. "Who pays for your trips?" She explained about work and savings. "Why the books?" He allowed himself a small smile, like a teacher who already knows the answer and is waiting for the student to quit. He didn't argue. He stated, "Books are influence. In this system, any action becomes influence, and influence becomes threat." They walked her up and down staircases polished smooth by shoes, cold air below, choking heat above. On one landing, they led past her a woman in a dark scarf. She moved like on thin ice and stared at a point on the wall. On another, a young man with a bandaged hand kept his back rigid so no one could read weakness. These people were like footnotes at the bottom of a page. The text was written long ago, and the notes kept multiplying. In the verification room, they asked her to sign a statement that she agreed to cooperate. A phrase built for any case. It's vague enough to fit everything. Here, cooperate doesn't mean help. It means not resisting. A signature becomes the grease for the gears. You can run the machine without it, but with it the cogs turn easier. Later, they took her where the machine keeps its memory. The archive. Metal shelves with boxes, each with a number, some with names written by hand. The archivist with yellowed fingers flipped cards like a fortune teller shuffling a deck. He didn't care about meaning, only matching tags, date of entry, names of contacts, overlap of districts. He filed her under review. In another city, that word smells like calm. Here it means they can keep you as long as needed. The system doesn't always shout. It usually whispers. Don't worry, it's just formalities. We'll finish soon. If everything's clean, everything will be fine. These lines repeat as often as footsteps in the corridor. They're designed so you spend your strength on hope instead of resistance. During breaks, they gave her a cup of water. The plastic crackled in her fingers. The water was warm, like comfort that changes nothing. She learned to speak the system's language, answer in strict chronology, remove adverbs, swap I think for I know, maybe for no. This language doesn't allow complex causes. It loves straight lines even when reality is a knot. At some point she noticed she was talking in short sentences, like the people across from her. It wasn't agreement. It was a way to keep words from dragging her somewhere. Every intonation would be used against her. Days blurred. They gave her a paper marked, "At the disposal of the authorities." A funny phrase, as if she were an item in storage. Paper moved faster than people. It collected signatures in 2 places so no one had to take responsibility alone. Shared blame is the favorite currency of large institutions. Small rituals were standard. Remove your shoelaces, leave your belt, move with your hands clasped even if there are no cuffs. Someone called it care, so you wouldn't hurt yourself from nerves. Care here was always double-sided. It served not you, but the report. The no smoking signs were just as double-sided since tobacco smell lived in every turn. Sometimes a man from above appeared. His sharp cologne arrived 2 steps before him. He asked 3 questions. 1 repeated what they'd already covered, 1 broke logic, and 1 was a trap. If you're not afraid, why do you keep your phone off at night? Any answer fed the next loop. There is no right answer here. There is only time, which you burn to roll toward the next door. On the way, she met the bookkeeping of this world. A receipt roll on a desk, notes about fuel for cars, gloves, reams of paper. The security machine is made of material life. It has expense and intake. It needs batteries for recorders, light bulbs, and coffee for sleepless nights. Knowing this made the system less mythical, not less strong. Myths don't need schedules, mechanisms do. On the 2nd or 3rd loop, they brought her again to a room with an overwhelming ventilation hum. The man across from her laid out photos of streets she had walked. He asked if she knew who lived behind this window. Some shots showed only emptiness, a closed door, a curtain. Emptiness also becomes evidence. The system fears emptiness because there is nothing to file. When they led her down the corridor again, she stopped trying to guess the time. She counted turns, 2 right, 1 left, then stairs. Inside her grew a quiet habit for order that had no meaning outside. That is the machine. It tunes you to its beat while you're busy trying to remain yourself. At the end of another day, they said tomorrow would be a deeper conversation. The phrase sounded almost academic. Her stomach answered with cold. She knew the loop was tightening. The security machine never rushes. It just makes sure you stop calling your steps your own. The door closed so softly it sounded harsher than a slam. They sat Stacy on a chair that didn't creak or rock. This room was built to avoid accidents, a flat table, a bare bulb, a notebook that never kept blank pages for long because other people's words filled them fast. The first man didn't give a name. He placed his palm on the table as if to show who owned the space. The same questions circled: roots, names, phones, books. She answered briefly, the way instinct had trained her. He didn't care about detail. He cared about motion. The point of interrogation is not to learn. It's to break rhythm. You answer. They cut you off. You stumble. They record an inconsistency. That's how they build the staircase they'll walk you down. The second man entered with a folder and a cup. His voice was that of a teacher used to being obeyed. He spoke gently, like offering two unpleasant but reasonable options. "We need a confession to close this out. You don't want your friends to be harmed, do you?" Stacy held her pauses like a hot cup. Let go too fast and you get burned. Hold too long and you get burned worse. When she said, "I can't confess to what I didn't do," he smiled briefly, without his eyes. "We'll help you remember." In this system, that formula always means the same thing, no matter what room you're in. They took her to another room. It was colder. Cold is a tool. It makes the body obedient and thoughts shorter. They swapped the chair for a low stool. A stool steals balance. She sat so her feet touched the floor and counted seconds between inhale and exhale. Someone behind her rustled plastic on a table. Someone checked a cable. The sounds described a script that hadn't started yet. The first blow is not about pain. It is about the border now being theirs. The body answers like a metronome has been installed in it. You control neither the beat nor the pauses. The questions repeated: who she saw, who she spoke with, why she stayed silent. Pain trims language down to simple words. She answered, "I don't know. I don't remember. I didn't." Those answers annoy as much as resistance. They showed her message printouts where every "how are you" looked like a signal. Her notes to friends about books became evidence. Why did you carry them? She tried to explain about help, about talk, about how words sometimes keep people from desperate acts. They cut her off, short and sharp. Words are a weapon. After that, the blow became the argument. Pain changes space. The room narrows to breath and the count in your head. You count tiles on the floor, nails in the wall, cracks in plastic. Any repeated detail turns into an anchor. Stacy held on to numbers, prayers in her own language, lines of poetry that once were just memory. In moments like that, memory is a survival tool, like a match in the dark. It doesn't have to warm you. It has to prove the fire is still possible. The roles alternated. One threatened, one understood. The second brought water, used her name, said he got it. He asked her to tell it human to human, with a tired voice that was fake. That's part of the game. Give hope so you have something to take away. Hope learns to walk in felt boots here, quiet and careful. Sometimes they left her alone. Silence after screaming rings louder. She listened to footsteps in the hall and could tell who was coming. Heavy steps meant a short talk, light and quick meant a long one. The next room had its own rhythm. They were helping remember in there too. The music of the walls makes people alike, like uniforms do. One interrogation lasted an eternity. They made her stand facing the wall, hands level with her shoulders. 10 minutes turns that simple pose into torture. Muscles complain, then scream, then give up language. Her shoulders shook. Her shoulder blades burned. Her arms ached under their own weight. Each time her hands sagged, a voice behind her said, "Higher." There was no time. There were only higher and again. Then, the bench. They strapped her legs so she wouldn't jerk. This technique has many names. 1 point. Show that submission can be total. Pain comes in waves, and in the seconds between waves, a person can think. In those seconds, she recalled faces. People she had brought books for. People who said her name without threat. A face becomes a horizon line you try to reach with your eyes even when they're closed. They shifted tactics. After the hard one came the kind one. He spoke of family, said, "No one wants trouble." He urged her to sign a statement already typed up. They offered the same text, but in your own words. She read it and felt how it stitched false links. She allegedly handed off a package, met someone whose name she'd never heard. The text was sewn rough but tight. It didn't have to be true. It had to be convenient. At some point, she learned a micro-pause technique. Don't resist. Don't agree. Take a beat between question and answer. That beat saves your syntax. It lets you pick a word that won't drag you deeper. She repeated, I don't know. I can't say. I don't remember exactly. These phrases are like bits of wood on the surface, not ashore, but enough to keep you up while the wave passes. At night they returned her to a cell. It was small and smelled of damp cloth, a thin mattress like an invitation to insomnia. She lay on her side, knees to chest for warmth. Her body echoed like something inside was knocking from within. Sleep came in scraps. She dreamed of stairways without rails and long corridors where the door stayed one step ahead. Morning reset everything. Water from a plastic cup, a face in a dull mirror where you look like yourself only in broad strokes, the same steps in the corridor, the same looks that carried no interest, only control. They led her through the same turns, and she counted them again like breaths before a plunge into cold water. Sometimes she met people where a streak of humanity showed through. A young soldier looking away when he saw the marks on her wrists, a woman who slipped a tiny cube of sugar into the tea. Gestures like these don't save you. They prove the world hasn't fully surrendered. That reminder can hurt more than pain because it shows how much else could have been different. By noon on day 3 of interrogations, they asked her to write her version. She wrote slowly, in block letters. Her fingers shook not from fear, but from exhaustion. She knew any word could trigger a new turn. So her text was a corridor with no side doors, dates, places, actions, no judgments, no guesses. A clean surface with nothing for the accusers to grab. Toward evening, we'll help you remember again. The same stool, the same cold, the same count. Somewhere inside that many-hour wall, she caught a simple idea. Live until the end of the session, until the next water, until the next silence. Survival doesn't need a philosophy. It needs small goals that add up to a path. When they brought her back, her lips trembled like after a long run. She leaned her forehead on the wall and felt the stone colder than the air. The cold confirmed she was still here. That, too, is a survival trick. Find a fact that won't argue with you. Stone doesn't argue. This world is built like that. You give answers, they teach you pain, they offer relief in exchange for logic. But as long as you have a count of breaths and the names you hold inside, they can't take you entirely. There are no heroics in this chapter. There is only stubbornness shaped like simple endurance, refusing a biography written in your name by someone else. Strategies of survival always look small on paper. Inside, they are huge, like load-bearing beams. Stacy built them out of what required no permission. First, breathing. She took a simple rule. Inhale for 4 counts, exhale for 6. A long exhale calms the body faster than talk. The count ticked inside her like a quiet metronome no one could fault. When questions cut up her pauses, she returned to those 6s. It was her tiny sabotage of panic. Second, language. She changed her syntax. She cut adverbs, removed maybe, it seems, probably. Kept facts, date, place, action. Any judgment was a crack for a blade. She spoke in short lines, like telegrams. Love of literature was unhelpful here. Accounting worked better. Lists instead of stories. Bullets instead of paragraphs. Third, a map. Cell, corridor, stairs, turns. She memorized the sequence, counted tiles, seams, vent grates. This navigation kept her brain from freezing in fear. If you can reconstruct the path from door to stool and back, then inside the chaos there is structure. Structure distracts from pain and sometimes gives the sense that you haven't fully dissolved in someone else's algorithm. Fourth, names. She repeated the people she once brought books for. Iman, Ammar, the old market seller who haggled and always lost with a smile. A name is an anchor they can't take. When they helped her remember, the names moved like prayer beads. Between them came lines of prayer and poems that once were just pretty. Now they were stitches holding the fabric from within. Fifth, the body. She used the smallest moves she could. warm her hands with breath, wiggle her toes inside her shoes, unclench her jaw so she wouldn't grind her teeth. When they made her stand facing the wall, she shifted weight from heels to toes, counted to 5, then back. Micro-movement saves you from frozen cramp. She also learned to drop her shoulders. Tension doesn't make you stronger. It just burns oxygen. 6th, water. Warm, plastic-tasting, table-flavored. Didn't matter. Water was a reason to pause, breathe, and look at the surface where the bulb's reflection shook. She always took the cup with both hands, a gesture no one could label as resistance, but for a moment it returned control over something that was hers, even if the water was theirs. 7th, time. In prison, it crumbles like bread without salt. Stacy gathered it by crumbs, the sound of a distant call to prayer, the evening cough of the generator, a stillness that felt like midnight. She didn't know the hour, but she knew the cycle. Her inner calendar wrote itself with events, not numbers. The day they led the woman in a scarf, the evening with a bandage on my wrist, the morning they gave sugar. Marking the cycle calms you. If there is a yesterday and a today, there might be a tomorrow. 8th, others. People nearby became mirrors where she could see herself whole. The young soldier who glanced away, the woman with the sugar, like a secret rite, the man in the next cell whose rhythmic cough helped calibrate her breath. These tiny human gestures teach the main rule. Don't romanticize saviors, but notice allies. Allies are rare, and they are always quiet. 9th, rules of speech and interrogation. She fixed 3. Don't fill silence, don't fight the wording, don't embellish. Silence is a trap, but filling it is worse. Arguing delights the interrogator. It gives him material. Embellishment is raw stock for someone else's text. When they asked for her version, she wrote in block letters, even and without adjectives. Words that can't be bent are harder to use against you. 10th, no legend. Inside such a machine, it's easy to invent a part for yourself, martyr, heroine, spy. Any fancy mask gives false strength and leads to mistakes. Stacy chose another role. I'm an ordinary person holding on to common sense. It's boring but durable. It doesn't provoke extra questions. In a world that insists on turning you into a character, remaining a person is a survival tactic. Once she caught herself asking permission for every tiny thing, to sit, to stand, to pick up a cup. She cut that habit mid-motion. She sat down. If they forbade it, she would stand. They didn't. In small moves like this, you grow an antidote to learned helplessness, not defiance, normalcy. And here, normalcy sounds louder than a scream. In the cell, she built 2 rituals. Morning. Tidy her hair as much as water allowed, fold the blanket straight, run her palm over the wall 3 times like over the back of a familiar chair. Evening. List out loud the things she kept today. A name, the count of breaths. I didn't sign the paper. I dropped my shoulders. We split the sugar. The day's total is plain like a receipt. It tells you that at least a few lines of your life are still yours. Once in the corridor, she heard the neat-handed young interrogator say to a colleague, "She takes long to break and isn't worth much." A throwaway line, but useful. It confirmed her pace was working. No outbursts, no grand speeches, just thick, steady endurance. The machine loves fast plots. Slow ones bore it. A tired mechanism sometimes lets go, not from mercy, but from economy. Another tactic: don't promise yourself miracles. If I survive this session, they'll release me. Sounds tempting and leads into a wall. Swap miracles for tasks. Make it to water. Make it to quiet. Make it to the voice that says, "Stand up." The paradox is that small tasks stretch life and big hopes crumple it. When hope crumples, only anger and emptiness remain. Emptiness is easy raw material for someone else's script. On the 3rd or 4th day of deep conversations, they offered a deal. Sign a confession for unauthorized activity, and things will move faster. She asked to read the text. It was the same rough stitching, names sewn to dates to events that never happened. She said, "These are not my words, not 'I object,' Not, "I refuse," just, "Not my words." The phrase worked better than arguments. Words prefer their own authors. When you politely refuse the author's seat, even the machine pauses for a second. Sometimes the survivor's guilt showed up early, before release. Guilt for breathing while someone screamed next door, for being given water while someone else got a plastic bottle with a promise of another round. She treated guilt the way she treated pain, divided it into parts. Inside this building, no one deserves more or less. Guilt helps no one. Memory does. And humor, quiet and dry. It lived in tiny notes to herself. A stool holding up dignity. Water with the flavor of protocol. Paper that agrees with everything. The laugh stayed silent, but it gave the distance she needed, like a frame around a picture. Without the frame, the image leaks. That's how her survival architecture took shape, from breathing, language, mapping, names, body, water, time, others, rules of speech, a refusal to wear a legend, small tasks, and quiet humor. From the outside, it looks like passivity. In truth, it's work. It doesn't make you iron. It keeps you whole enough to outlast what was built to break you. When it ended, it didn't look like freedom. It looked like another door that opened without comment. Morning was sticky and dull, like water in a plastic cup. They led Stacy through a corridor where she knew every sound. "Pack up," someone said. "No explanations why today. No apologies." In places like this, events don't have causes. They have executors. They returned her passport like an object from someone else's closet and pointed to the exit, where the air smelled not of bleach, but of street dust. The first breath outside felt like a yawn after a long dive. The world didn't rush to hug her. It continued, indifferent. A car idled at the curb. A seller argued about tomato prices. Someone fought over parking. That lack of ceremony was the real climax. You returned to a life that didn't wait for you with music. She took a taxi, gave the address, and for the first time in many days looked at herself in the rearview mirror. In it was a woman who had learned to save words and protect breath. That knowledge doesn't vanish with the turn of a key. Her hotel room stood empty like a stage after the play. The charger she hadn't taken on day one lay on the nightstand. Stacy sat on the bed and realized she couldn't lay her head on the pillow, as if the pillow was provoking a sleep that wouldn't come. She did what she did best, made a list, not of chores, but of facts. "I'm out. Passport with me. My right arm hurts. I want water. The room is quiet." Facts became a small bridge. They don't console. They hold. The next hours went to phone calls, short, like telegrams. "I'm okay, alive, I'll tell you later." Each call felt like hauling a rope to shore. Friends answered just as briefly as she spoke. "Thank God. Hold on, we're here." Inside every "we're here" sounded something hard to say out loud. Some of them also had corridors, doors, stools. Their "we're here" meant, "We know this air and it didn't break you." A day later, she left the city. The road back wasn't triumph. It was a quiet retreat. At the airport, she noticed how, by habit, her eyes traced a route: desk, line, check, gate. Her body still ran on the security machine's algorithm, only now it powered a return trip. On the plane, she closed her eyes and didn't hear a scream. Emptiness came instead. Not better, not worse. Neutral. You can build on neutral. Home felt both too familiar and strange. Taps that didn't squeak. Doors that slammed without sounding like a verdict. An electric kettle that boiled without a pause. Tomatoes with a clear taste. She wanted to hug these things. And a shadow arrived with them. The doorbell sped up her heart. Footsteps in the stairwell sounded like them. The body kept its map and triggered at any similar noise. At night, flashbacks came. The stool, the higher voice, the cold stone wall. She did what had saved her there, counted exhales, spoke the names, held on to facts. Here's my desk. Here's the window. Here's the kettle. It's night. I am home. Facts saved her again. What changed for her? The volume knob inside. Before this, she believed meaning came from loud words and strong arguments. Now she knew meaning rests on small decisions. Don't sign a stranger's text. Don't say more than needed. Don't give away the authorship of your life. She didn't become a heroine. Heroics there would have been a pose. She became someone who can function with thin air and heavy pressure. That skill helped outside, too, with people who demanded simple answers to complex questions. She had learned to keep pauses and not fill silence with fear. What changed around her? Less than she wished. The security machine kept working. People still vanished for a few questions. But the conversation began to shift. Stacy began to tell, carefully and precisely, no flashy details, no sensationalism. She spoke about the bare bulb, the stool, the water, the line, if everything's clean. These details build a reality for listeners who once thought it was abstract. Abstractions don't move the world much. Reality cuts a slit in the wall. She didn't believe in healing as a point you reach. She believed in the return of rhythm. A day when you can drink tea, write a letter without shaking fingers, and fall asleep without counting steps in a corridor is already part of healing. She didn't look for catharsis. She watched her language learn adjectives again. Sometimes she allowed the smallest ones, bright, warm, familiar. That too is work, only peaceful. The most important change was in her relationship with memory. Memory stopped being a stash of pictures and became a duty, not to freeze horror, but to return people to their full size. Prison knows how to make people small. Telling returns their height. In every talk, in every conversation, she repeated a simple thing. No one should become a character in someone else's protocol. Your biography must stay yours even when the paper agrees with everything. She understood that safety isn't a promise. It's a process, and that getting used to quiet doesn't cancel anxiety. Some days the body tossed up old signals again, tightness in the chest, trembling knees, a sharp breath at a slammed door. Then she did what saved her there. Small tasks. Make it to the end of the call. Make it to morning. Make it to the moment when the kitchen smells like bread. This math of survival works even in a world without the stool. The climax of this story isn't that they let her go. The climax is that she stayed herself. In a city where the word truth sounds like a sentence, she kept the right to sign off on her own life. The machine tried to rewrite her text. It failed. That is enough to count the day as won. What changed for society? A bit more accuracy in speaking about torture. A bit fewer illusions that, if you don't get involved, it won't touch you. Stories like this make the air sober and heavy. They don't promise rescue. They offer bearings, trust facts, hold on to names, remember the mechanisms that break people, and support those who made it out and are learning to speak again. There's nothing shiny here. But from such plain gestures, you build the thing that one day might be stronger than any bare bulb and any stool. In the end, she kept a simple formula. Life after prison is not about forgetting and not about an endless scream. It's about the discipline of small freedoms, breathing with a long exhale, calling things by their names, refusing to sign someone else's text about you, and passing on a memory where a person is more than their case file. It's not a loud victory, it's resilience. And resilience, it turns out, is the main currency for those who outlast machines built for breaking. Write in the comments, in stories like this, what matters more to you, facts or emotions? Stacy's story isn't about heroism, it's about stamina built from small things, a long exhale, short phrases, names you hold on to. The torture machine runs in a routine, systemic way, but you can refuse to hand over the one thing that matters, the right to sign your own life. Facts are stronger than myths, precision cures illusions, and telling gives people back their height. The takeaway is simple. Speak about torture without sensationalism and with respect for the person. Support those who came out and are learning to live again. Trust details and remember the mechanisms that break. Resilience grows from small freedoms and the daily discipline of memory. If this kind of story matters to you, subscribe and share the episode so more people understand why precision matters and why silence is dangerous. Leave comments to keep the conversation alive and useful.